Just a disclaimer, this video will contain manga spoilers up to chapter 1011. Viewer discretion is advised. In the spring of 2022, a certain event happened in the One Piece manga that would quite literally change the entire landscape of the series we've been following for close to 30 years now. In a showing of radiance and ridiculousness, Gear 5 made its unforgettable debut. I don't think it's an understatement to call this a cultural phenomenon, a radical once-in-a-lifetime event that will stick with those who witnessed it in real time forever. The revelation that Luffy's Gum Gum Fruit was in actuality the mythical Nika power this whole time is, objectively speaking, a massive plot twist. The very status quo of what we knew for over 1,000 chapters was uprooted overnight seemingly. Gone are those days of Luffy being just an ordinary boy from the East Blue who ate an otherwise useless rubber fruit and ascended to the top of the pirating world in record time. Now, we found out he's the man people around the world have waited for, the one who is destined to bring about the dawn, the warrior of liberation. This bombshell, of course, completely recontextualizes everything. The very concept of this sun god is still quite vague to us. It's been mentioned here and there sporadically throughout One Piece, but we have very little idea of what this sun god is besides hearsay of their exploits and of course whatever we're seeing from Luffy right now. How was Luffy going to defeat Kaido? This was one of those questions that plagued the fandom at the very beginning of the Wano arc. Nobody had a clue as to what that looked like, and more so than that, none of us thought the means of the defeat would come after Luffy dying at the hands of Kaido and reawakening as an ancient deity with the power of endless imagination on his side. Now, as much as Gear 5 makes sense from a story standpoint, there is one thing that is 100% true about this form, and not everyone will like it for this very reason. It's a joke. Author Eiichiro Oda specifically engineered Gear 5 with the idea in mind of it being a joke that fans would be disgusted by. He felt that over time, shonen manga tended to become too serious and he didn't want that to happen with One Piece. Well, mission accomplished, I say. There is now an inherent level of wackiness present whenever Luffy dons this white-haired form, and that wackiness won't be to everyone's taste. Sure, in the past, Luffy's fights have had their fair share of shenanigans. This is the same god who thought to shut his brain off and let his body move by itself in the midst of his fight against Eneru. There's the infamous Water Luffy moment versus Crocodile. A lot of Luffy's attacks are extremely goofy from a conceptual standpoint if we're keeping it real here. Gum Gum Stamp is just Luffy extending his leg for a stomp and giving it a simple name. Luffy throws a ton of punches and calls that the Gum Gum Gatling. In Gear 2nd, it's Jet Gatling. The point is, there has always been this not-so-subtle zaniness to Luffy and how he generally operates. It's this disposition that makes Luffy who he is at his core. He might have moments of anger, rage even, where he's dead set on destroying the foe before him no matter what. Luffy is a force of nature the likes of which manga has never seen. If you're a friend of his, then good for you. You're one of the lucky ones. The sun god's fury knows no bounds, and we know what happens to those who earn his wrath time and time again. But that wrath is the pure love of those around him manifesting into strength. It's the equivalent of walking under a rainy sky and knowing you're okay because you have the sun's protection. I would argue it's one of those things that makes Luffy such a compelling character. His ability to switch from carefree to absolutely infuriated at the drop of a dime is a true testament of the type of guy Monkey D. Luffy is. A common critique of Gear 5 is that it lacks tension, and although I personally don't agree with this statement, I can kind of understand why anyone would feel this way. For well over 90% of the story, this mythical form of Luffy's was not a thing, meaning Luffy's best moments usually looked and felt a certain way. Think back to your favorite Luffy moment. Was it when he obliterated Bellamy and Jaya for spitting on another man's dreams? Or is it the ever infamous and satisfying punch on the Sabaody archipelago that sent St. Carlos flying? Maybe you're like me and you just can't get enough of Luffy's epic standoff in the center of Navy headquarters against all three Marine admirals. All of these incredible moments had a particular air to them. They kind of makes you go, oh shit, I've messed up after stepping on the tail of a sleeping lion. These were bouts of passion and anger, all culminating in a sequence of brilliance that continue to wow fans to this day. That's why Luffy's other gears are so beloved. Gear 2nd and 3rd, for instance, are the direct result of a captain understanding he has to grow to protect his friends. The presentation of these forms vastly contrasts Gear 5, but there is one trend that you cannot ignore, and that is the progressive goofiness of every Luffy form the deeper we get into the story. Gear 2nd is a tamest as far as appearances and general zaniness go, to meaning this would be Luffy at his coolest and justifiably so. It's something about steam emitting off a clearly incensed Monkey D. Luffy that just screams raw. We all know how epic Enies Lobby is, and I would say that the context of this saga only adds to how awesome Gear's second and third are. Gear third is grandiose, limbs the size of a giant, but in essence, it's just Luffy inflating himself like a balloon for a bigger kick or a bigger punch, whatever his wild little mind deems fit.
Gear 4 is where things start to get a little bit weird.
The Bound Man transformation effectively turns Luffy into an enormous balloon man, coated all over in armament haki, and as we've seen, it packs one hell of a punch. Keep in mind, when Luffy revealed this form for the first time in the Dressrosa arc, Doflamingo laughed in his face, asking if he were really serious, to which Luffy insisted that he is in fact serious.
Not too long after Doflamingo was knocked halfway across Dressrosa by a Gear 4 Bound Man Luffy, we didn't see a gag of Luffy bouncing away on his ass, trying to catch up to Doflamingo because the former Bound Man has made his body stiff and rubbery, meaning he can't even walk straight. So this just goes to show that just because something is serious does not also mean that it can be comedic when the time comes, or even the other way around. Seriousness and comedy are not mutually exclusive. They don't have to exist separately, and this is exactly what we're seeing with Gear 5. I would even make the argument that Gear 5 is a very good thing going forward for One Piece, and I'm going to elaborate on that a little bit later in this video.
Tank Man is basically a fat-ass version of Bound Man that came after an entire night's worth of feasting on the Biscuit Warriors of Charlotte Cracker. It's incredibly silly, but it's something only Luffy could conjure up with his fruit power in the circumstances presented to him. Snake Man is in the same vein as Gear 2nd, where it has a feeling of absurdity because, well, it's Luffy, but it's also just because it's really damn cool. Luffy figured he would need more speed against a fearsome opponent who could foresee his every move, so he takes the form of a snake and adapts an entire fighting style fitting for this reptilian appearance. Luffy embodies the impracticality of man and the limitless potential of imagination. We have witnessed it all of this time, and it simply reaches a head with Gear 5. However, the biggest difference between it and prior transformations is the latter are all dependent entirely on Luffy's individual strengths and abilities. Gear 5 is not that. This form is the personification of hope. I can't name many other characters in fiction who have put their team on their back more times than Luffy. He has never hesitated to prioritize the well-being and betterment of his friends and their desires over his own selfish wants, damned whatever could happen to him in the end. After 32 major story arcs, 108 manga volumes, 1100 anime episodes, and over 1100 manga chapters, Luffy is not the same plucky pirate fighting his way to the top of the world. It's safe to say that our favorite eccentric rubber man sits comfortably among the very strongest of the One Piece world. They say hindsight is 20/20, and that definitely applies here, because Gear 5 is genuinely the natural conclusion of everything we have seen from this Wonder Boy born in the East over the last 3 decades. If anyone deserves to have a good time while kicking some ass, it's Luffy. We've seen Luffy fight tooth and nail against opponents the size of mountains. He's nearly starved to death to save a friend. He risks his life in the affairs of nations that have nothing to do with him for the sake of his friends, and would go as far as making enemies of the entire world to protect his comrades. Luffy has seen hell many times over, and he's come out stronger because of it. It's his experiences and journeys across the Blue Sea that have created the man ready to change the world. It's said that the legendary warrior Nika freed slaves and did so with a smile. As we see, whenever Luffy's in this awakened state, everything he does so smiling, laughing. So does this constant state of joy ruin the high-stakes drama of One Piece? I don't think so. Gear 5 goes beyond the very reaches of what's possible or not in this gargantuan and romantic world. We would see it on full display for ourselves in the final stretch of the fight against Kaido. This was an extensive war against an Emperor of the Sea, and as both combatants were on their last legs, rather than this fight being a super serious death battle until the end, Gear 5 injected an entirely different life into the single most important duel in the series up to this point. In a fight against the strongest pirate in the world, the scenes where we were treated true from an awakened Luffy were positively ludicrous. We have never seen anything like this ever before in One Piece. Luffy wasn't fighting the way a rubber man would anymore. Once the drums of liberation sound, Luffy pretty much became a fully realized gag character. Gear 5 is all of the insanity of the Monkey D. Luffy character turned up to 11. This guy is knocking the strongest characters in the verse around and laughing manically all the while. Looking at this factually, it is a significant change of pace. But it's important we remember that Luffy is a bit of an idiot by nature. There's a part of him that can't help but to be a little unserious, for lack of a better term. That's exactly why the Strides end up in the situations they do. Where One Piece is headed, this story needs Gear 5. As we've seen in the Egghead arc, there exists a deep-rooted darkness at the top of the world, a darkness the likes of which we have never opposed before, and the only way to topple this evil is by fighting that malice with the unconventional means of the sun. That's precisely what Luffy and the power of Nika offer us. Luffy represents something much deeper than his dream of becoming Pirate King. He is the man the world has longed for, the light at the end of the tunnel, the flickering candle that illuminates every inch of darkness in its wake. Gear 5 hasn't changed who Luffy is. From the East Blue all the way to the land of the samurai in the New World, Monkey D. Luffy has brought hope and joy everywhere he's went. Even in the face of inconceivable tyranny and tragedy, it is Luffy's place, it is Luffy's role to pierce a hole through the thick veil of despair and carve out a path of light. Let's face facts, Luffy is in a league of his own, and he has to be. There will be very few, if any, instances of Luffy being absolutely overwhelmed by another antagonist similar to versus Kaido, because he's now present in those conversations when we talk about the One Piece world's greatest warriors. We're used to Luffy struggling greatly in his fights, but with this newly attained ability, the game has changed. Oddly enough, the best example of what we can expect from Luffy's fights going forward is his battle versus Admiral Kizaru in the Egghead arc. Think about it. Luffy is not necessarily significantly stronger than Kizaru. You could go as far as saying they're more or less relative. At no point during their encounter was he portrayed as outright superior to Borsalino either, in my opinion. How powerful Luffy is and how powerful he could potentially become is no longer entirely dependent on how hard he hits or the amount of haki he outputs. Perhaps the best thing about the Gear 5 Awakening is that it gives Luffy a seemingly boundless pool of offense to pull from, meaning every battle going forward would be much different from the previous.
Luffy vs. Kaido looks nothing like Luffy vs. Rob Lucci round 2, and neither of those fights resemble Luffy vs. Kizaru in any way besides the utilization of Gear 5, of course.
There is a massive strength and unorthodoxy in being so unpredictable and off the cuff. Your opponents are left confused and helpless in the face of this unrestrained might. A maneuver like the Gum Gum symbol is only possible via Gear 5. Imagine taking two of the most dangerous combatants in the series, flattening them with a massive clap before flicking them into the distance like discs. This is insane. The truth is, Luffy is at a level where he can do truly anything. Gear 5 has no limits or boundaries. It cannot be confined by anything other than one's capability to seek and pull off the impossible. Luffy stood face to face with the 5 Elder Stars, and in a way that only he can. This guy conjured up a baseball bat and then proceeded to hit a literal home run on the highest level of authority in the world. This does not happen without Gear 5.
Luffy's mere existence is a juxtaposition of everything the Golden State stands for, and you can really see it in how they operate.
Dead-eyed, with no will of their own besides the instinct to assert what they call justice over the population. They represent the purest form of evil out there. They are creatures straight out of a nightmare, horrors we hope to never see in the dark. The best solution to combat unbounded evil like this is with the immeasurable knack for freedom. What the power of Nika puts in the hands of Luffy won't be to every person's individual taste, by design. It's supposed to be uncanny and animated, stupid even. Like I said, it was created with that in mind, and that's why it's perfect for the final saga of this series. It's not uncommon for stories to become darker over time. That's usually what happens in a shonen manga the closer the narrative gets to the endgame. Characters mature over the course of time, and as we all know, growing up means you're gonna see some shit. It's inevitable, and this tone shift can be brutal, but it doesn't have to be this way. What Gear 5 does is maintain that feeling that made us all pick up One Piece in the first place and multiply it. One Piece is not a dark story whatsoever, and Nika is a reminder of that. It's pretty obvious that Oda isn't at all interested in having his life's work be reviewed as dark in any way. No matter how much the heavens cry or how hopeless a situation seems to be, there is always a ray of light to look out for. One Piece is supposed to make us smile. Every tribulation, no matter how long the winter lasts, is inevitably followed by an event of mass felicity. It's why Luffy is a perfect main character and Gear 5 is the perfect transformation. Luffy is not a vengeful man. He's not driven or motivated by hatred. Monkey D. Luffy is the hopes and dreams of all mankind in human form. We get lost in the details of this wonderful tale, but the one lesson Oda has driven to our heads for the last 1100 chapters is the dawn will always come. The dawn is warm, the dawn is comforting, the dawn is a reckoning for those who rebuke it. How many instances have we been shown of characters praying for salvation from their troubles, only to be granted it by a rubber boy in a straw hat and sandals? A young girl and her deceased father are bonded even in his absence. How? because they both entrusted their dreams to the sun god. Their pair withstood unfathomable pain, but they never wavered. Eventually, their prayers were answered, and before their eyes one day shone their savior, the man the world will one day come to know all over as Joy Boy.